Brian, can you tell us a little bit about the plants that we feature on the Strange Flowers book? That would be
Sure,
that would be fantastic. I switch
sure.
into this presentation here.
Yeah.
Maybe-
Well, you've got it on the screen, and I've got the book here, but um, it's it's a 30-page book. It's paperback, and it's got this beautiful cover of the flying duck flower on it. And what we have is 13 pictures, 13 plants that are depicted. So there's the Rafflesia, for example. And on so one side of the page, you get the artist's rendition of what this thing looked like to him or her. And then on the other side is the diagram to color in, right? And so with to get some help, there's this great little feature down in the bottom corner. See if I can get it straightened out here. The QR code. There it is. And if you zap that with your cell phone, you get a little video to give you hints on how to draw it. And so that's kind of cool. And so what I put together a little slideshow that will very quickly.
Absolutely, Brian. So let me connect the slideshow, but I just
Yeah,
want to place on the screen a QR code. So if anybody's interested in getting this book, they just need to scan this QR code that is in front of your face right now, and that will take them directly to the book. So this is the presentation that you were referring to. So this is Strange Flower, a bilingual book, both in English and Spanish. And I will be moving through the pages if you want to talk about the different species and content. So
sure. Well, we can start with reviewing what I just tried to explain. Much more difficult without a picture. So we're going to use a picture, and I'll just review what I said earlier. The parts of the flower, the 4 parts, and these are numbered. You start with 1. 1 through 3 are the parts of the pistil, and 4 collectively is the pistil comprising the ovary, style, and stigma. These are the female parts. The next row of numbers, 5, 6, and 7, are the 3 parts of, the 5 and 6 are the 2 parts of the stamen, which is numbered 7, right? That's the male part. And then I mentioned the petals. They're colored red in this particular cartoon of the flower. And then the sepals are green below. And the other 2 items on here are important. The ovules, which become seeds once it's pollinated and become seeds. And a fruit grows around to protect the seeds as it matures. And the receptacle is simply the green structure holding all this miracle of evolution together in one place. So we can move to the next slide, Kike. And this is the cartoon of the most basic kind of pollination that's going on. Take a bee. This little cartoon bee is going to the anther of the flower on the left, and it's going there for some reward. It might be nectar, it might be pollen, it might be an aroma. Who knows? All these things happen. But for whatever reason, it's in that flower. And once it's there, it brushes up against the anthers, and pollen gets knocked loose onto the bee, which gets stuck on its hairs. And the bee gets done with that flower, then flies away, finds another flower of the same species, and repeats. And in the process, puts on top of the stigma, which is the green structure on the right that the bee is sitting on, and a pollen grain gets on there and germinates and goes down through the pollen tube, through the style, into the ovules, and voila, if it all works as possible, then you get fertilization and a seed. So in a very crude way, that is the concept. And now there's near infinite permutations to that and exceptions to it, which is what keeps botanists employed. So let's move to the next slide, and we'll go to what's in the book. There we go. So first up is the maypop. So the maypop is in the passion flower family. I'll start with this one because for a couple of reasons. I'm personally familiar with it, being from Tennessee in the United States. Very common, beautiful flower. It's a wild flower, wild plant. It can be grown in one's garden very easily. And it's pollinated by bees. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see I've got a picture of what a photograph is, and there's a bee on this getting nectar, sweet nectar from the flower. and then go into another flower and will pollen and deposit the pollen on that one. The plant is called maypop for the reason of the fruit, which is depicted on the right. It's this green, not quite mature fruit, and it pops because if you step on it on the ground, you hear a popping noise. It has delicious fruit that can be eaten and made into custards and jams and such. So it's a very simple, kind of straightforward pollination scenario, kind of like the cartoon diagram. And it's very easily observed. This sort of broad open flower, just welcoming any pollinator that happens by. The bee happens to like the nectar. And it's not just this one bee. Many bees are involved, probably, many species. But it's a very, very simple, good one to start with. And pretty soon, things are going to get a little crazy. So
Yeah,
let's go to the next.
actually, let me tell you that Passiflora is one of my favorite flowers. When I
Oh,
photograph it, I think it's so beautifully designed by nature. It's really stunning. So let's move to the next one you're suggesting.
yeah.
This would be the
Okay, the
parrot
parrot.
flower.
Yeah, the parrot flower. So this is in the balsam family, and it looks like a parrot. Now, why would that be? Um, let's go to the next picture. Here we can see a bee is pollinated, a bumblebee pollinating this flower, and it picks up pollen. It's attracted to the flower and then transfers it to another. So it has a shape that the bee fits into. So one of the things you'll find in the way evolution has designed these flowers is to fit a certain size and shape of pollinator, right? So a bat is not going to go into that flower, right? But the bee fits just right in, and it's coevolution. That's another term I'll throw out there because what these relationships depict is how insects and other animals, we'll come to that later, birds, even mammals, pollinate plants. There's a mouse that pollinates a melastome flower called Blakea in Costa Rica in the cloud forest. A mouse. Crazy, right? That's for another book. But we'll focus on this here right now. Anyway, so the parrot flower is pollinated by bees. And this plant, let's see, um, it's known from the Asia. I don't know it personally, Thailand, Burma, and parts of India. That's where it occurs.
Mm-hmm.
So we see a little more specialization of the flower. It narrows down the kind of bee that can get in there, but it gets the job done. So if we go to the next one, here we got another crazy looking thing.
I know,
This
beautiful.
is beautiful, right? I mean, it's hard. How can this be? So this is the laughing bee orchids, or a group of orchids of the genus Ophrys, and there are a number of orchids in this genus, and they have an interesting shape. If we can go to the next picture,
There you go.
you
Mm-hmm.
see a picture of the flower and then a bee that goes into it. And what's going on here is the male bees think they're going to mate with a female bee.
Mm.
The orchid flower is in the to the male bee looks like a female. So it's going in to mate with that bee, but it's a flower. And by the time it knows it's been fooled, it has landed on the flower, picked up some pollen. And in orchids, this is an orchid, as mentioned, the pollen are not little grains. They're packed into a packet called a pollinium. So this yellow blob you'll see on one of the, I can't point to the picture, but you'll see little yellow dots on the orchid flower hanging
Yep.
in front. It's a pollinium. Well, the bee, that'll stick to the bee's head. And I think on the right, it's showing a pollinium stuck to the bee, which is being moved to another flower. So that's how this species of orchid and the bee have evolved to create the cycle of life for the flower and the bee. And hopefully the bee will eventually find a female bee that actually is not the flower. So it too can continue its life.
Hmm.
Um,
What fascinates me is the combination on functionality and beauty. It's both at the same time. It's uh, it's pretty magical. You want me to go to the next slide?
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
The
So
flying
this
duck.
flying duck, this is another orchid. So this is another example and we can go to the next slide here too.
Sure.
Um, and you see a photograph of the flying duck, and it's pollinated by these called sawflies. So this is why people get crazy with scientists. The sawfly is actually a bee.
Okay.
Don't ask. It looks more like a fly, but technically it's in the bee order, and so that's why it's bee pollinated. That's why it says that in the book. But it's another example of what's like previously described as pseudo copulation, false copulation between the male bee and the flower. So this is yet another example of that, flying duck.
Okay, let's move on.
Yep, moving along.
We have the Cuna de Venus, a swaddle
Yep.
baby in English.
Swaddle baby. So this, the angulola is an example of a species of tulip orchid. We can go to the next picture and see the little baby orchids there, and a very bright metallic colored bee sitting on the flower of one of these. So this is the kind of bee you're not going to find in Europe or the United States or in Asia, and it's only known in the American tropics. It's called a euglossian bee. It's called an orchid bee. And this, the swaddle baby is one of these. This plant grows in the Andes along with others of the same genus, high in the Andes. It's a terrestrial orchid. And what's going on here is this bee, the male bees are attracted to an aroma. If you smelled this plant, if you had a live one of these plants and smelled it, it'd be very, very aromatic. There would be very attractive smell. Well, the bees pick up on that, and what the male bee is doing is not there to eat the aroma. It's gathering the aroma in special slits on its legs, and it gathers it up. It might also eat pollen too and take it back to the nest or consume it. But for the purposes of this story, gathering the nectar is what brought it there to begin with, right? So it takes that, not nectar, the aroma. So it takes that aroma and goes flying around, and female bees are attracted to that aroma. They can sense it. And according to studies, they're more attracted to bees with more of the aroma. So it's sort of an evolutionary advantage because it shows maybe a stronger male bee has collected more aroma, better for mating in an evolutionary sense. Anyway, the female is attracted and mates with the bee. But this is, and we're going to see more examples of this with other orchids, these orchid bees, and they're beautiful. They look like little gems. They come in bright blue. This one's green here. The genus Eulema. This is Euglossa in this particular example. So I'm going to talk about more of that, the Euglossan bee scenarios later on.
Okay.
So this is from central the Andes. We can go next to the next
Protea.
Yeah. Now I'm doing these in kind of an order of kinds of pollinators. So we just finished a whole series of principally bee pollinated plants. And now we're going to give you a bird section. So the Protea here is not entirely pollinated by birds. It's sometimes insects, as was the case with many flowers, but it's principally birds. This is from South Africa, this plant. We can go to the next slide. It's where this grows. And what's going on here is what you see on the left, the Cape sugarbird is one of the principal pollinators of this king Protea, which is a big flower. And by the way, it's not one flower. This is another thing that botanists get, what's the right word? Peeved about. That's not, how do you translate peeved into Spanish, Kike? Annoyed about. Because it's actually an inflorescence. There are many tiny flowers, better seen on the right where this beetles are making their way across it. It's like in the composite family, but it's not in the composite family. It's in its own family of Proteaceae. But same idea, the individual little tubular flowers, and the bird sticks its beak down in there and sucks out the nectar. And the bees have long tongues, and they get down in there and get nectar too. And in the process of their feeding on this nectar, they move pollen around. So this is an example of principally bird, but also beetle pollinated plant. We're going to see more beetles in action later in the book. So let's move on, keeping moving. The hanging lobster claw. This one is from the American tropics, and anyone who's traveled into tropical America knows this plant is planted in every hotel,
Absolutely.
probably garden, because it's so spectacular. And it's related to other plants in this same family, the Heliconiaceae, but it's differing from the others, right? In that the opening is hanging down, right? So it's really evolved to be pollinated by hummingbirds, and there's a hummingbird going in there, getting the sweet nectar, doing the job of pollinating in the process. And the hanging lobster claw is one of the names of this. It's also the false bird of paradise plant, it's called. And you cannot go to Latin America to a town and go to a hotel and not see this plant. And if you're lucky, you see it.
I photographed it a million times, so
I'm sure. I should have talked to you to get some photographs for the show. Now I know. The next slide. Okay, what is going on with these guys? So this is one of my favorites. It's such a fun little plant.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is in the Calceolariaceae. It's a tongue twister of a name. It's related to the snapdragon family, but botanists in doing their studies have segregated it out to its own family. But these are tiny little plants, maybe best seen how tiny they are in the next slide. They grow in the mountains in Tierra del Fuego. They're tiny. They're they're like 4 inches tall, little guys, and they're pollinated by birds. These seed snipes. Now, what are they doing? The birds are these birds apparently rarely drink water. They rely on the foods they eat to get water, moisture. What they're doing here is they're also getting sugar. So these little white things are sugar-dense structures that are on the plant. The thing that looks like a tray or a gift on a tray. Mm-hmm. If you're imagining someone holding a tray, I guess that was the concept of the name. Anyway, and these birds just go in and eat that white, delicious treat, and in the process get pollen on their heads, go to the next one, moving it around, and there they go. Oops. We're getting ahead of ourselves.
Sorry, my fault. Doing too many things at the same time.
I know. Well, you're a multitasker, Kike. I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, especially about after Hurricane Ian last night. Yes.
So here's the monkey face.
Yes.
So Dracula semina. We're back to orchids for a brief reprisal of the orchid family. So what's going on here? This monkey face orchid is pollinated by flies, because what this is mimicking, this flower, is a mushroom. A mushroom. Let's go to the next slide. And yeah, there's the monkey face. And so flies think it's a mushroom, which they're attracted to because it's they lay their eggs in it. And also this flower emits a stinky aroma, a fetid aroma that sounds like decaying mushroom. And so the flies come in there thinking they're going to lay eggs or get a meal. But of course, they've been deceived. There's a lot of deception. This sort of a love-hate relationship between flowers and their pollinators, right? They get fooled again by going in, but by the time they know they're fooled, they leave, but they've got pollen on their bodies and they transfer it to another flower. So that's what's going on here.
Fantastic. Let's look at the next one here, the black bat flower, which I think is very interesting too, like all of them.
Yeah, this one's in a different family, the yam family. Now, here's something I learned in doing some research for this book, Kike, is that it had been thought that the flower looks like a bat, right? That's why it's called a bat flower. And so maybe insects would be thinking that it is a bat. And so insects are attracted to this plant, maybe thinking in many insects, like flies, will use mammals as hosts. They will lay their eggs in the bodies of a mammal. That's how they reproduce their larvae. But it's been one experiment I saw that said these plants were in an experimental condition self-pollinated. I haven't mentioned that term, but this is one of the things that the basic pollination scenario is meant to prevent. So the same flower does not pollinate itself, but they found in this case, and in some plants, this is the way pollination happens. That is, the male, the stamens from one flower will pollinate the style of the same flower. So you don't get outbreeding, you get inbreeding. So you don't get as much evolutionary potential this way, but you do get reproductions sometimes. In this case, so the jury's still out on this one. So yeah, there's the guy. Isn't that spectacular?
It is.
You couldn't invent that. I could not tell someone this is what a flower looks like. They say you're kidding. No.
That's why you were having a hard time describing at the beginning.
I
The
know.
options are never ending.
And I hadn't even talked about flowers that don't have all these structures, like grasses or wind pollinated things. They're the size of a pencil eraser. They don't have all these parts. They just have the bare minimum. You have the anthers and the pistil. Anyway, not so here. You got all kinds of bracteoles and whiskers. It looks like a bat, and flies think so too. And it's an amazing story. This thing occurs in Southeast Asia, so I have not seen it. Thailand, Malaysia, southern China, very spectacular. I'd love to see it someday.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
And we have this one with this interesting name, the Darth Vader.
Yep, Darth Vader. Well, so what happens here is another fly is attracted, if you go to the picture, the decaying aroma and a fly gets in there, and then hairs that kind of trap the fly once it gets in there. And even if it knows it's been fooled, it can't get out right away. And so it's in there and it's crawling around, and it picks up pollen on its body. And eventually the hairs wither. They get old and wither rather quickly. And the fly goes away off to another flower and transmitting the pollen. So this it's in the Aristolochiaceae family, and it's got this amazing adaptation.
Absolutely.
A Darth Vader.
And we have the stunning Keith's Rafflesia.
Yeah, so this is like the world's biggest flower. This is one flower, and this one also has a very interesting relationship. It's a parasitic plant, right? And maybe best to go to the next picture.
Where do you normally find this one, Brian?
This only is in Sumatra.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a parasitic on a vine in the grape family. I mean, you really can't make this up. And it's required to have this great woody vine. That's what it's on right now. It's in the genus Tetrastigma, and there's several species of Tetrastigma. It's a well-documented phenomenon. But anyway, all the parts of the plant are inside the vine, other than the flower that you see there. Mm-hmm. So the flowers smell like rotting flesh. So the scenario that we're getting with these fly, but it's not just flies, beetles get in there, carrion beetles and flies. And so they transport pollen from the male to the female flowers. And so this is very rarely cultivated. It's very difficult to cultivate. It's highly endangered. In fact, I meant to be talking about some of the endangerment of these plants as I went along, but I was feeling hurried to get through. But this one is extremely endangered. And the World Conservation Union, the IUCN, has gotten this a system for cataloging those plants that are at different degrees of endangerment, and this one's right up there. So don't look to be bringing one of these home, because first of all, you couldn't grow it unless you had the woody grapevine. Mm-hmm. Let's go to the final one, the finale, the corpse flower.
Gigante, the corpse flower.
Keeping on a macabre conclusion to this little show. So this, so we had the world's largest flower in the last slide in the Rafflesia, and this one is the world's largest inflorescence. So the distinction there is this structure in the middle of the arum. This is in the arum family, It's called the spadix. And this is the specialized structure, in the center that's sticking up where the male and female flowers, the female flowers are toward the base and the male are toward the top. And they open in different time periods, the males and females. So the stamens open first, but the females aren't open yet. The flower's not open, so that the pollen gets transmitted to other corpse flower individuals for outcrossing purposes, and then the females open, and so on. So that is the mechanism there, the sequential opening of the male and female flowers, which are on this one inflorescence, as I mentioned. Mm-hmm. Let's go to the next one. And so you can see this is a complex life cycle, so don't get too crazy with this. But hey, you're lucky because the Titan arum is a favorite plant of botanical gardens. You can see one at the New York Botanical Garden. Every botanical garden wants one of these because it's a showstopper. So it's got 2 cycles of life. If you start at the top in the center, just a simple way to look at it is the corm, the reproductive vegetative structure that's in the ground, underground. And if you go off to the right, you can see the leaf structure, the leaf cycle. So to the right on the slide, first of all, it germinates maybe once a year, one single leaf come up. This is one leaf that comes up, grows quite tall, and then dies. But what it does, well, its purpose is generating energy. It's taking in sun, converting it through photosynthesis to chemical energy stored in the corm. Life goes on, back to the corm. That happens every year. Then over to the left side, the flower cycle. Every several years, there's enough energy in the corm to pop out the reproductive structure of the flower. And so you see it puts out this one big inflorescence to the right, going down through the cycle, and up it comes. It only lasts a few days. And that's why you'll see cameras. You may have seen these that are like 24/7 cameras at botanical gardens. They have them trained on the plant because they know when they think it's going to open, and it opens, and they record it, and then it just dies down like that. You can watch it kind of in real time. It's amazing. And so this is also pollinated in the field by out in nature by flies and beetles. For the same reason, it smells like rotting flesh, dead. If like feces, it attracts flies and beetles that like that aroma, and they do the job of moving the pollen around. And one little anecdote, being from the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx, I want to mention, we had at our institution one that flowered a number of years ago, and we still have them. And at one point, because of its notoriety, the flower, this plant became the official flower of the Bronx.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, the corpse flower. But at some point, I think around the year 2000, it got renamed. The Bronx flower became the daylily. So I don't know what borough president or mayor was involved in that decision, but I rather like that the botanical garden was the sole custodian in the Bronx of the borough flower.